let's get started with our next person. It is 9:20. We are going to, next we are going to hear from, let me pull up a little bio here. We're going to be hearing from Elizabeth Rodríguez Fielder. She's going to come sit up here so that she can be heard. She is a scholar of 20th and 21st century transnational American literature and culture. She works at the University of Iowa currently. She received her PhD from the University of Mississippi. And she works here in our English department and also works in our Latinx studies department. So we're gonna get her stuff pulled up and turn the time over to Elizabeth.
Hi everyone. Okay, so I really like that I'm going first in this. Thank you, Giovanni, for inviting me to speak because I'm coming at it from a really, really different angle, I guess. And also possibly this might be the easiest use of OER, especially considering what Giovanni was showing about barriers and like hesitancy and the time constraints. I spent really little time as an instructor on this journal, which is called On Coffee. And so kind of similar to what was just being said about going to the library. During the pandemic, I realized that I really needed to create a space for my students to have time to focus and create and write. And I knew that I wanted to do a creative final project with my students in the class that we did on coffee. So I went to the library and I said, I'd like to make a journal issue as like a kind of ebook, and I want it to be beautiful. What can you do for me? And they said, we have this thing called Pressbooks. It's part of an OER platform. And so I said, okay, I'll figure out how to use it and have my students be able to use it. And so I'm hoping that I can go to the Pressbook first and foremost, just because, is that okay to click the link?
Yeah. We're gonna have to share a different screen now, so give me just a second.
Yeah, sorry to keep you on your toes for this, but I think I'm gonna go back and forth a couple of times. So this is the journal issue here. And so this is the introduction that I wrote together with Lupita Zabaleta, who's a MFA student in Spanish as well. So we worked together during the course because she is writing a series of interconnected stories based on a coffee plantation in Oaxaca, Mexico, as her MFA. And so I created this journal, and if it's possible to go to the first to the contents there, to look at image 1, An Offering by Hayden Williams. And this became the cover of the journal there. And this was designed by one of the students in the course. And the quote is from Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, which is a beautiful collection of writing and about kind of creating a very mundane ceremony out of pouring a cup of coffee into the ground in the morning. And if you could go to the, I just want to showcase a couple, just so the first in the main body there. So in the main body tab there. Yeah, so if you do the plus sign there, great. And then Condensed Coffee by Savannah Zobek. So Condensed Coffee. It first came from Yemen, where the beans burst Karmzi, and bombs fell from heaven, smuggled away they migrate. Desert scenery changes to Las Montañas as it enters Colombia, where the harvest is prosperous, but side effects are insomnia. The beans flow into the States, a nation that never sleeps, caffeine sharp and bitter, as it creeps and sneaks into our anima mea. So the goal of the coffee issue, and I'll talk a little bit about where a Boundless Journal comes in towards the end, was to create a world that really existed as coffee has existed, which means that it migrates, which means that it is a transnational, coffee is a transnational substance. It carries with it memory and nostalgia, and it carries with it a lot of warm, pun intended, relationships. But it also carries with it dark histories of colonization and pain and trauma. And so asking students to write between multiple languages, I also wanted to create this kind of polyglot world and reflect that in writing as well. So if we could go back to the PowerPoint, as many of you know, I mean, I can talk and I can present, but the way that we actually engage with something is through doing. So I have a writing assignment for everyone for today, for right now. I want you all to write 4 lines of poetry. You can preferably do it with paper and pen, but if you have a digital tool, that's fine. 4 poetic sentences. If you don't feel comfortable writing poetry, you can write 4 poetic sentences instead. Or about coffee or an equivalent. So I just based on the crowd, I'm going to guess everyone has a relationship here to a lot of Italian teachers and Spanish teachers have drink coffee. But if you don't, if you're from a different kind of culture that has a different kind of beverage, you can use like or a memory tool. You can use an equivalent. If you can, write them by hand. If not, that's okay. They must engage with nostalgia and the tonality of saudade. Right? And if you don't know what that last word means, it's kind of like, I don't know, like the tone, the essence of being wrapped in nostalgia. They must contain both the language you were raised in and one you acquired or are trying to acquire. If you're multilingual, then reach for the language you are most comfortable with and the one that you are least comfortable with. And there must be crossover between cognates that disrupt the meaning of the word cognate. So if you think about, you only have to do this once. You don't have to do this more than once. It's a lot. So an example, I have 2 exampple here. Mi corazón lleva a cord that binds me. And you can see that the cognate is between corazón and between the word cord in English, right? Now that pushes the kind of idea of the cognate, because cord and core, I mean, I don't really get, we could do the kind of tracing of what that's connected to, but it's not something that's obvious. Or if you want to get even more elevated, between the Danish word flel, right, which means like the ironing, but it's also like a really popular shopping street in Copenhagen, flel, so that means iron, or sell, which is what it sounds like in English, right? Sell, right? And putting that together.
Acknowledge this already, but you did have a question of the chat of does it matter which language it's in? But I feel like you talked about that.
Yeah, so I hope that I was able to kind of connect that it actually really doesn't matter what language it is, and I hope that you flow between the 2. I'm going to give everyone some time to do that. If you don't finish it, it's okay. I'm not grading you. Take another few seconds. Okay, so we did this a lot in my course, and over Zoom during the pandemic, we became very close with one another as we shared. Like if you were in my class, you would be sharing at this point, and it created like very personal crossover, and students could work between different languages, which I thought was really important too, because I think one of the things about language acquisition that I don't know, probably y'all talk about much more than we do in English, is that there's a lot of trauma around how people learn languages and when they speak. As someone whose mother's internalized racism, for myself, made sure that I actually actively did not learn Spanish when I was growing up and I had to learn it in school. That's the future of a lot of kids that are in this country right now. And so that's something that has to be addressed. So creativity as a tool and sharing and working between different languages, and having kind of like creative games too, are ways in which I was trying to, I think in some ways, help students to, I mean, for me, having them write in English is also having them exercise translation too, because they're continuously having to translate from their mind, their soul, their experience into something that's legible to other people. So if we could go to the next slide, thank you. Yeah, and so Mahmoud Darwish was the Arabic writer that was really central to the course. We read Memory for Forgetfulness, and that was really powerful. And within that kind of sense of thinking about writing as a mode of healing, and healing at the same time as learning, coffee's complexity was something that I really wanted to connect to the emotional terrain of learning and writing. And so the complexity of how can we have feelings for something that are a feeling of nostalgia, a feeling of a memory that's so connected to something wonderful from our past, something like remembering coffee, at the same time learning about its really complex history with colonization and with all of these, and continue, it's not even a history, it's a living history if you consider contemporary coffee plantations today, right? Something that has a lot of issues, and having to really address the concept of, is there anything called fair trade, the effects of climate change and how that's going to radically change coffee, and coffee growth. It really makes something real when you think about the fact that coffee, some of the best coffee beans are not going to be sustainable in about 50 years, right? And so you have, in some ways, that kind of complexity together. So I love this quote here, and you became like coffee in the deliciousness and the bitterness and the addiction. It's about holding like different things together at once, and that is some of the best process of writing and of learning. Okay, next slide. Great. Another thing that I really wanted to emphasize through a lot of these writing exercises and creativity, and through the semester-long study of one thing, one object, was to slow down. And this is another Darwish quote: coffee should not be drunk in a hurry. It is the sister of time. It should be sipped slowly, slowly. Coffee is a sound of taste, a sound for the aroma. It is a meditation and a plunge into the memories and the soul. And so the kind of slowing down through a singular object, in a world where students are faced with so much fast-paced everything, right? You have to learn everything about everything all at once. I thought that that was kind of a way of really trying to slow things down, and continually coming back to those ideas consistently throughout the course, and learning and unfolding a singular concept over week after week after week. So this is where the press book really, really helped. So all of these kinds of the writing exercise that you all just did, plunging into memory, getting personal, finding that common ground, but really wanting to connect it to something larger, and having that kind of community that's built be reflected outside of the classroom space. So I worked in the class with Sharif Abdelkarim at Grinnell, who's an Arabic speaker and scholar of like ancient Arabic poetry, and came in and talked to the class. Lupita Zabaleta, who I now have like this really strong relationship with, and I was on her MFA thesis committee, and Hannah Olson, who's an undergrad who runs Boundless Journal. And we discussed literary translation, but our conversation extended beyond word source concept and cultural translation and miscommunication. And so this is a community that started forming around this course and around the press book. And so just to really emphasize that concept of connecting to something larger, if you could click on the Magid Center link, it wasn't enough for me to just say, like, I'm going to publish this journal and it's just going to be for the class. I wanted to do something that could kind of exist in another space as well. So the Translate Iowa project, if you could click on Boundless there. So Boundless is a journal it's a translation journal run by undergrads at University of Iowa here. And you can kind of see, I love this, the student-led organization where the meaning of the word translate holds no boundaries. That was perfect for the project, right? And so if you could go up to the submissions, no, publications, I'm sorry, so publications there, and go down a bit, yeah, and even down further. There we are, right, on coffee. So I asked Hannah, could I have a special issue that doesn't exist in print, because that's a lot, but can exist in this digital format as a press book? And it built a relationship between the students in my class and this other undergraduate-led journal as well. And so the students felt like they were writing towards something that was more public-facing, and that they were kind of putting their work out there in a way that it's accessible, not from some like Canvas or Blackboard link that disappears, or just within this course and then it ends, but coming across and realizing that it's part of an archive of a student-run journal, I think added that sense of like extending out into the larger community. To create this press book was really, really simple in comparison to some of the work that other people are doing in this room and on Zoom. But I kind of wanted to say that, like, or start with this sense of like, the simplest thing could also have like a lot of really positive consequences, as long as it's aligned with like the kind of intention and pedagogy of what you're trying to do with the course. And I think that's kind of all I've got for On Coffee. If anyone has any questions, or I don't know if we're saving questions to the end.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any questions really quick before we turn over to our next speaker?
Got some applause hands.
Christine, do you have a question?
I do. And it's a technical one. Thank you very much for your presentation, Elizabeth. And this is a technical question that I don't know if you have the answer or are interested in it. But when you got to the end and talked about the Magid Center journal as a more permanent home, my understanding is that some press books at least have ISBNs, and that they in fact are the more permanent version than the Wix site that we're looking at. And like I say, that may not be a question you're interested in. I certainly think whatever encourages students to publish in the direction of a public-facing audience is absolutely to the good.
Yeah.
And if that's what happened with outreach to the Boundless Journal, then that's absolutely that's perfect. I just wonder if anybody knows about the ISBN number status of press books.
And Christine, I emphasized that a lot when I was talking about like the rationale. So this is like an ungraded project, like it's for participation, and we had other graded things in the class, right? I talked about the kind of rationale behind doing it as being like, you are then saying that you've published in an undergraduate journal. And
Yeah.
I'm helping facilitate that in the easiest way possible, because one of the biggest barriers for like young creative writers is that first foray into publication, right? And I'm really interested in like kind of what are stepping stones to a lot of like anxieties that prevent writers and people that are trying to do translation, right, of any kind, like how to kind of get beyond those barriers. And so in some ways, like here you are, you're already like translating in certain ways, right? Like if we extend the definition of translation, you're already using multiple languages, right? A lot of the students use this as a platform to finally creatively engage with the second language, right? So you see a lot of writing in Spanish and hybrid Spanish English and French, right? It doesn't matter what language it is. It matters that we're creating like a polyglot, like kind of creative space, right? And so really looking at okay, now you've already published in something, and I'm hoping that that just takes the edge off, and to say like, this is public facing, this has an ISBN number, like this is something that exists like permanently in the world, so bring your A game, you know, and the work was really high level that was coming from that. And to just see in the chat, like it was every student in my class, so it was about like 26 students, and then I emphasized like it has to be really short because of that, right? The entries have to be shorter, even critical entries. So people did critical writing within that. It wasn't just creative. It could be like literary analysis and stuff. Even that had to be condensed and short and really kind of get at something within that. So.
Thanks.
Well, I know our time is short, so I'd like to swap over to our next speaker.